All right, here we are at Sticks Out podcast number 11 with Mr. Ben Drexler. Hello, how you doing?
Hey,
How you doing today?
I am getting over a cold, but otherwise well.
Excellent, excellent. So I just wanted to bring you on because we share a history of poi and life, and I just figured it'd be cool to get to know you a little better because I think a lot of people maybe see your voice from speaking on the internet, but maybe don't have a lot of perspective. So, who are you, Drex? Where you from? How'd you find this poi life?
Um, wow, who are you? That's a deep question. No, I'm originally from Boulder, Colorado, and I got into poi spinning when I went to my first Burning Man in 2006 and saw Fire Conclave for the first time. Which there was something that connected in my head about that. That was like, oh, I can learn how to do that, and that would be awesome. I think it's beautiful, so I decided that I wanted to. And came home from Burning Man and asked around to my circle of friends to see if anybody could tell me, hey, what's that crazy fire thing we saw at Burning Man, and do we know anybody who does that? And I think I was asking around for like 2 or 3 months, and then finally somebody said, "What, you mean poi?" And they literally could have said any word whatsoever, and I would have been like, "Yeah, that." So it is completely arbitrary that poi spinning is what I got into. So I said yes, and they said that we had a friend that did it, our friend Salty. And so I asked Salty for a lesson, and he spent 2 hours trying to teach me how to do a basic reel turn, and I could not do it for the life of me. The idea of like going from kind of the wheel plane place to wall plane and then back to wheel plane was not something that computed for me. I kept getting one arm behind me. And I gave up. I thought that I was never going to learn how to spin poi, so I didn't go for another lesson. And the only thing that brought me back into it was my roommate came back from spending Christmas in Thailand with, those sets of fire poi they sell in the markets there that are like, the sawn off electrical conduit that has cotton wrapped around it and everything.
I've seen them.
Yeah, they're kind of death traps, but he brought a set back for me, and he's just like, "Hey, you want to learn how to do this, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So I started spinning that pair and practicing regularly with them because I kind of, I felt like my friend had done me a solid, and I kind of didn't want to disappoint him and everything. And then discovered that there was a fire jam down the street from us in Denver at Confluence Park, and the rest is history. I fell in with those kids, and they kept me going. And a few months later, Nick Woolsey started posting his tutorials on YouTube. That's how old I am. I remember when Nick first started posting tutorials to YouTube, and that sent us off to the races.
So, you seem to be sort of the technical mind. What brought you to the technique? I mean, you seem to be moving in the past 7 years more in the dance direction, but it seems like what was interesting about tech, or what did you particularly, relate to in technical spinning and things like that?
Sure. So, I honestly, you're gonna find this hilarious, but I never ever thought of myself as a technical poi spinner. Like when I was first starting off and everything, everybody in Denver was way more technical than I was, and I always kind of felt like I was nipping at everybody's heels. And then when I moved to DC, ironically enough, so that first year that I was in DC, it was when you and Greg and Ian came around and taught workshops. Um, I really wanted to take Ian's dance workshop, but as you'll recall, everybody took that workshop. And this was like one of the hottest days of the summer. It was probably at least 100 degrees out, 90% humidity. We were all like going for shelter inside the air conditioned house every second we could get. And so like doing a dance workshop outside where, you know, there's no longer any room underneath the shade structure and everything was just not an option. So instead, I decided to go to your class, which was, you were doing linear extensions and how you use linear extensions to build up like triquetras and things like that. And that was honestly my first aha moment and realizing, oh, okay, well, tech is not actually as hard as I thought it was. Um, and I think I took Greg's class later on in the day about stalls and isolations and everything. And it was taking those two workshops that kind of broke down that barrier for me and was like, oh, I guess I can do tech. and that's when I started. I think I started my tech blog actually 2 or 3 months after that. Just as I was learning new stuff, everything started coming really, really quickly to me, and I started doing that video to kind of just give myself a reason to practice and keep myself working on new stuff every week. So um, it's funny because even then I never thought of myself as specifically a tech spinner. Like I definitely felt as though I was still really engaged in the dancier side of things. But in retrospect, I realized I never posted videos of that. So that was not the impression that people got of me. Um, and so making dance front and center was something that came after many, many years of kind of being, I guess, pigeonholed like that, and feeling as though, like, there was never an aha moment of, oh, people only think of me as a tech spinner because that's all I post. It was just kind of getting to a point where I had such a glut of content that felt like it was more dance and performance based that I was kind of like, oh, I need to start posting this stuff. And I think that's when, to the general public, there was a shift, so to speak,
So you started the tech blog soon after, learning tech. What were the reasons for starting it? And what kept you doing it? Because for me, it seems as if you really, endurance is your skill, apparently.
I would say consistency, but endurance is another good way of putting it.
And I'm just curious, why did you start it in the first place, and what managed to continue to motivate you to continue it? Because I think in the early days, and maybe even still now, sometimes there's a little bit of hate that comes your direction, or dislike, or whatever you want to call it, about running a tech blog. I'm just curious, first off, how did you get started and why? And how do you keep going despite, positive and negative feedback?
Sure. So as with most things, there was never just one clear reason for it. There were a bunch. One of the reasons was that at the time I was working for a nonprofit here in DC, Genocide Intervention Network, and we had people that were coming back from conflict zones with content. They'd been interviewing people that had been displaced by conflicts, or that were working with refugees and internally displaced peoples and the like. And I really wanted us to start up a podcast. I really wanted to get this information out to the general public because I thought it was really important. And the pushback that I kept getting from the organization was, well, what kind of a time commitment does that look like? How much time is it going to take for you to put together a podcast? And I had no idea started this was actually to figure out how much of a time commitment it is to create one piece of media every week for general consumption. It was originally supposed to be a podcast. YouTube had this thing at the time where it said that it would generate an RSS feed based upon your videos, and I thought that meant you could download the videos out of a wrapper, but no, it turns out this wasn't the case. Number two was that I wanted to give myself a reason to practice. If I was doing a video every week, then it was one of those things that in order to do the week, I had to practice in order to have something to show every week. And so it was kind of a backdoor way to motivate me to keep on practicing every day. And the third reason was that there was a woman that I'd run across on YouTube in these early days who had posted a weekly video of herself, basically every week, this is what I learned, this is what I've improved on and everything. And I thought it was a really cool idea, but she'd stopped doing it after 3 months. And there was this thing in the back of my head that was like, man, what if this just kept on going? What if you just saw a person keep on growing with their spinning skills over the course of several years instead of several months, right? So the tech blog was kind of an amalgamation of all these three pieces put together, with, of course, some inspiration both from the Vulcan tech blogs that you guys were putting out of Unit 48 and everything, and of course Nick Woolsey's videos. I was really conscious of the fact that because Nick talked to the camera and he was such a friendly presence and everything, that I felt like I was bonding with him as a person, even though I had never met him. And so I very consciously early on borrowed that model because I liked the idea of forging friendships with people across the internet. So why I kept doing it.
So wait, you were kind of, before you get on to that, so you were kind of the early podcaster in some ways without really realizing it, which is something that I just realized sitting here is that you put your face out there on a repeated basis, and you kind of said something that really related to how people see podcasters now is that they grow with them, right? Like when your podcaster has a child, then the demographic that watches it also has a child, and they watch that. And I just kind of, I never really thought that aside from your technical, you know, delivery of information and things like that, you also were kind of early in the curve of presenting yourself as a social media figure. And so that I think that's part of the reason why people can still relate to you today is that they can watch a video of you wearing the Freddy Krueger sweater and tight pants and then kind of see like, oh man, sorry you called it that, but you know, they could see old videos of you and be like, wow, that's where Drex was, look at him now. And that's just interesting for me to realize. Go on, why do you keep doing it? Sorry.
Yeah, well, and I want to bookmark something you said in there too, because I mean, when I first started off, clearly I wanted to bond with people in this way, but in terms of the long-term goal, there was no way for me to know that like kind of being a social media presence and everything was going to be the way that people created like a business or presence for themselves in the future. Like, of course, nowadays that seems really obvious in retrospect, but the fact that I was in that position, that was not so clear at the time. And it was never my plan to, you know, kind of create a business around a personality or anything like that. I just got insanely lucky that I chose the right platform and the right way to deliver a message in the right time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think Nick in our interview kind of says the same thing in some ways, where he didn't mean to be, you know, YouTube famous from his videos,
Right.
and you know, you don't. It's just interesting how a lot of it seems like a plan, but it turns out that like people look back like, wow, Drex really had this big strategy in mind, and that's not really the case.
No, and this is a thing that I really frequently like. And I imagine we might get into this a little bit more later on in the interview and everything, but like in terms of becoming a personality or like the awful term flow famous in the community and everything, I've always had kind of a tough time with that because in the back of my mind I know that anybody could have done this if they just made the right choices at the right time. And like kind of ascribing things to people that get lucky like that is something I have a hard time squaring a lot of the time, you know?
Yeah, and it kind of brings out, you know, and not to get into the psychological world, but the sort of imposter feels on the inside where it's like, how did I, and I feel that too, you know, like I run festivals that I got in early, and that's fairly clear. And that getting in early, people, I mean, I've worked hard, much like you've worked hard. You know, I can't ignore the amount of work from getting in early till now, but at the same time, it's also true that anybody could have been that, and there were others. They just didn't necessarily have the consistency or endurance to maintain during those hard times, right? No offense to those other events or anything, but it's just, yeah, it's interesting perspective.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people will, you know, come at you and be like, well, so you think you're one of the best because you have this presence around you and everything. It's like, no, I know I'm nowhere near the best at this. I'm nowhere near the best at creating content. I'm nowhere near the best at spinning poi. I'm nowhere near the best even at dancing with poi. But I'm consistent, and that's what I had going for me. And I got it at the right time, you know?
So, yeah, so why do you keep doing, or how do you keep doing it then? Like, how, just to kind of go rally back to that, how do you keep maintaining?
So, there's a different answer for different periods over the past 11 years is the short answer for that, you know? I mean, at first I literally was just doing it on a lark, and I don't know if you remember that period or not, but I wasn't sharing the videos with anybody. Like, it was literally me just posting the videos and forgetting that they existed, and I'd get like maybe 1 or 2 videos in the course of it. And then I think it was about 4 or 5 months into it, all of a sudden the view count spiked on those first 3 videos, and I'm like, what is going on here? And it turns out that there was a thread on Home of Poi, or it might have been Tribe, I can't remember which one, where somebody was asking about 1.5s, which, you know, nowadays we call them 1.5s because you couldn't write a 1/2 in the title field of a YouTube video at the time. And Alien John had linked those first 3 tech blogs to them, and all of a sudden I had an audience. So one of those first motivators was like, oh, there's people watching now. I got to keep on doing this. I got to have something for them to see. Um, and honestly, that didn't like motivate me for that long. The really big moment for me actually came the next year. I'd come back, so I was in Europe and I'd run into Alien John after the European Juggling Convention, and he was showing me some of the diagonal plane stuff that he'd been working on with G at EJC, and I posted a video of that to my YouTube channel, and there was this aha moment for me where I realized, it's like G, I think in his entire poi spinning career, posted maybe like 4 or 5 videos to his own channel, and then there were a whole bunch of other videos of his that got posted on other people's channels that they'd run into him during their travels and record him and then post him YouTube and everything. So G himself really wasn't that prolific in terms of creating content, and that was kind of a shame because he had a lot of great ideas that just never got out there for people to kind of digest and remix and everything. And I realized that because I was traveling so much and I had a camera and I had this, for lack of a better term, platform to be able to get this information out and everything, I could do people a service, I could be this conduit for information that was going around at these events from people who didn't produce a lot of content and weren't getting these ideas out to the general public. I could get these ideas out to the people that were most hungry for them and most wanted them and were most likely to take them and internalize them and turn them into something new as well. And that was really what broke open the floodgates to me, is realizing that this didn't necessarily have to be just me, dicking around in my living room and showing off what I learned in the course of a week. It could be something that actually helped the community. And that still to this day is one of the primary motivators for me, is realizing that, at the core of what I am doing is being able to help other people out.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because you and I's paths are very similar in certain directions, and for me at this point, like, I find that just having this conversation is the way that I can give back in any way, right? And I think, I could still, posted a stick video a day, or do all this other stuff where basically I'm sitting around waiting for validation, or it's kind of like you said, which I thought was really astute, is turning on the camera and trying to nail a trick for like 10 minutes sometimes helps me practice. I'm not even gonna lie, like setting it up, the whole ritual of getting ready to try to do it actually motivates me. But it's interesting just thinking about the types of ways that we can share outwardly that will continue to motivate us intrinsically. And I think it's good to know, because a lot of the stuff, the love battery conversation comes into it, which I always bring up, which is a Patch Adams thing, where it's like stuff that you do that spends that battery, namely editing the videos, getting hate on the internet, things like that. But there's stuff that charges it up, and it's like that one message every now and then that comes from a person that values what you've done, not to make you feel better, but because legitimately it's helped them along the way. So that's pretty cool.
No, totally. And I can point to a recent example of that. I started doing these combo challenges on my Instagram every week, where I'll have like a bunch of tricks that I'll put together in a combo, and I'll put it out there to the internet for people to learn. I'm like, send me your videos of this combo and everything. And part of this actually comes out of feedback from people that are on my email list or my Patreon or what have you, and talking about one of their big challenges being finding transitions or trying to find their flow or getting between tricks and everything. It's like, here, take my method for doing this, and maybe you'll find your own in the course of this. And one of the videos I got back was from a dude in Tehran who, he was telling me that like there's actually an underground flow scene in Iran right now, and that it means a lot to these guys to be able to find these videos that I'm creating and have something to learn from and everything, because there's no poi teachers there. And so they're having to learn completely from the internet. And you see these videos come in from this guy, and they're all in his living room and everything. And I just imagine him practicing away from the public eye and everything, this thing that he enjoys, in this place where it is difficult for him to be able to express himself in the way that he wants to. and that really meant a lot to me. It was one of those like holy crap moments of like, wow, this actually really does have an impact in people's lives.
Yeah, I think our perspective here in the States is pretty narrow, right?
Yeah.
Like the people that struggle that we see, for example, the festy kid that's having a hard year or five, right? Like
Yeah.
that person needs help, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, if you travel around the world, I think you would find significant, especially I've learned this through the IJA and the amount of people that the IJA reaches, for example, going to Afghanistan that Aaron did, and, women, the only activity that they're allowed to do that's the least sexy is juggling, which is hilarious in some ways. But they can only do that in like 2 to 3 provinces in Afghanistan. They can't even do it in every province. It's wild. And so just thinking, or even like another story I heard, this is in another podcast where Aaron went to Benin in Africa, and it's pretty much all men juggling. The female, the woman's sort of role in society is a little bit behind the man's, if that makes sense, namely supporting and things like that. I'm not like pooping on the culture. I'm just saying that's just how it is. And, she was really inspired by teaching a single woman to juggle. Just stoked about that. Just one. And
Oh, totally.
And it's funny. Just we should transition here, but I think something that's interesting is how much the inspirer and the inspired, if that makes sense, that sort of dichotomy has been really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Where for you, I was like trying to be flow god or something when I came through DC and trying to like I'm this guy that knows all this stuff, and then incidentally ended up inspiring a person without really realizing that direction until multiple years later. And I think that's probably true for you in a lot of ways, where like a lot of people see you and they participate, they watch your videos or hear you speak about stuff, and then they're kind of like inspired, but you don't really know, right? That's kind of the trippy part, is like for me, is the amount of people that have been inspired by you and sort of us, but we don't really know, right? Like I don't get out enough to really see the amount of inspiration. There was a point in time where like all these people in Europe had seen my Contact Staff DVD that was translated into German. I'm like, who are you? Like, well, basically, you can't even talk to me because I don't speak German. There's like a different algorithm world for German people, and it's just like trippy just to think about how much responsibility. Like, this is a big question. I guess I'll just ask you because I'm curious about it. Like, how much responsibility do you have personally for being the inspirer to the inspired? Right?
You are asking a question for which I do not have an easy answer, and which I have journaled on in, like, they could probably fill a novel at this point with the amount of stuff I've written in journals about this. Because I don't have an easy answer for it. I have met people face to face who've told me that the content that I've put out has helped them get through difficult times, that they feel like they're still here because of the things that they learned from me and everything. And on the one hand, that is an incredible thing to know, and on the other, it is terrifying because, when I don't know how any human being wraps their head around the idea that they've done something that has kept somebody on this earth. Like that is so much responsibility and such a huge weight. And the terrifying thought that comes with it inevitably is, if ever you decide to quit, what is the cost of that? Yeah, I still don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it a lot too, because it's kind of why I keep my public face kind of hidden over the years, is that I don't consider myself to be the most awesome human being all the time. I would assume most people feel that way. And like I'm not terrible. I recognize my faults for the most part, but I don't want to have a responsibility for. I already teach kids. I'm already responsible for like 54 kids or 43 kids' development on a yearly basis. It's funny to. Yeah, I get that. I think the best thing, is like it's like, how do you weigh yourself versus your responsibility, right? I think that's like another way to look at the question is like, how do you weigh your own need to be healthy, mentally ready, and, freaking happy versus like the responsibility you have to others to contribute that to others, right? And I think that's the real tricky part of that question for me, at least.
Yeah, and what a great problem to have that you have to wonder about how you inspire people. But at the same time, I like it's so difficult to explain to people who've never been in that position, just like the responsibilities and the weight that come with it and everything. And that it's difficult.
Yeah, so transition here. So like, there's like there's often, for example, I could think of this, I've done this, and perhaps you have too, you're at a festival and you make an action that you think is just normal, but somebody gets like really offended, like, oh, that person dogged me or pooped on my trick or whatever. How do you deal with negative feedback that you've received over the years? Because that's something that, I haven't struggled with, but because once I started struggling with it, I just removed myself in a lot of ways. Like I was, I could think of another, pretty much the best poi spinner that's ever lived has gone through this. And I think, not Nick Woosley, but just thinking like, I get this negative feedback for this thing that I enjoy, but then it's coming at me. How do you deal with all that? Like, how do you like emotionally not get drugged down by it, or do you? Or yeah.
Well, sometimes I do. Especially in the earlier parts of my career, when people like would give me that kind of feedback and everything, it absolutely would hurt, and sometimes I'd lash out about it and everything. I think the one big example I can think of is when I started the Poi Top 10 list, which, nowadays we're 6 years later, and I think people kind of think of it as an institution in itself. And I wonder how many people remember the year that it started. And I got raked over the coals for putting that together. People were very upset with me. And it really hurt when that first year when people were pushing back and saying that it was going to destroy poi spinning and that it was going to make it all about ego and that what I was doing was hurting the community. And I pled my case over and over and over again. And the part of it that I couldn't wrap my head around, and that I still can't wrap my head around, is this idea that there has to be only one way in which we're doing it right if we're in the flow arts. That, like, if you are not seeing it as this very pure, self thing, you're not allowed to make money to like hold yourself above the other people. And there are people that enjoy the competition. There are people that enjoy feeling like this is a prop to help them meditate. There are people that just enjoy it from the perspective of, I'm gonna dick around in my living room for 5 minutes when I get home from work, and they don't need to be the tech god that devotes all of their time to learning how to juggle poi. And I have always believed that all of these things are the right answer. There is no wrong answer to how you engage in this. And dealing with folks for whom there was only one right answer, and I was given the wrong answer, and that it was impossible for people to find their own answer and still have the art be what it is just something that I still can't understand at all.
Well, I think a lot of it touches on people's insecurity, right? Like, for example, you found poi, it made you feel confident. You lit that thing on fire, people watched you, you had some glow poi at a party, people were stoked. Then you thought you were on top of the world. But unfortunately, there is a community or a world of this that exists outside of your small community, and that, your place in it is actually a piece, it's not the whole thing. And I think that's where a lot of people get upset about contests and things like that, where it's like, it provides a different lens for them to recognize their I don't want to say actual, but one of the places in which they could be in this community, namely a
Right.
part of the larger thing, right? Versus just being like, I live in this small city and I'm just kicking butt, or I'm go to these parties and I kick butt. And I think that that's really a hard thing to take. I think a lot of burners experience that coming out to flow events often.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like, I started going to burns and I kicked butt. You know, I was like the man. And then I started getting out into the world, you know, traveling the world, kind of traveling the country, meeting people, and I was like, holy crap, I'm just getting started here, and the ceiling has just been elevated. Like, if I want to reach, you know, my potential, like I used to see it as right in front of me, but now I see it as so far away.
Totally.
And for me, that was motivating. I don't know. I think for other people, that can be really demotivating.
Yes, and I will say straight up, I get that. I totally get that. The part I have a harder time understanding is, so why don't you just not watch the top 10 video then? Like, it's really easy just not to participate in that. And the idea that by it existing is like a threat is the thing that I have a hard time with. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, IJ confronts that with the stage competition, you know, and there's lots of other ways. Okay, so I got a question for you. So, what are you spinning these days? Like, what's happening in Drex spinning world?
I mean, probably 90% of what I do is dance with poi at this point. You know, I spent 6 or 7 years dancing with a pre-professional company here in DC, learning how to do modern dance in my 30s, which that was fun. And you know, it's taken a lot of years to kind of put together the pieces of how to merge those two worlds, because of course, you know, there's no such thing as a suspension in poi. It's, you know, you've either stalled the poi or they're moving, and so your body has to be moving too. Figuring out how to join together the momentum and figuring out how to play with shapes and poi and everything. And I feel like, especially in the past year, there have been a lot of aha moments, and the pieces have really started coming together in a way that I'm liking what I see, and there's room to create this thing that literally for like almost a decade I've seen it in my head, but I couldn't do it. And that's really exciting. I'm really enjoying the things that come out of that, not only because, you know, it feels very personally fulfilling to be able to do this thing that I've wanted to see for so long, but also because it really merges together those worlds of, you know, expression and poi spinning. You know, I get to dance out my day as I'm sitting there practicing and everything. I get to take all that emotion from, you know, how did this make me feel? How did that make me feel? And get to just like flow it out and make my body express it, which is really, really awesome. On the more technical front, I am so deep down the gunslinger hole right now. It is not even funny. You know, we are, God, we are so just like in the baby stages of what that is going to turn out to be, because, you know, there's all the like Vulcan tech gospel stuff and everything that you can do with flowers and everything that we haven't even touched with gunslingers, even though we know that gunslinger flowers are not only possible but look really beautiful. And, you know, figuring out the depth of stuff that's possible there is something that, you know, we haven't even begun to touch it yet. So getting down in-spin gunslinger flowers with both hands took me over a year, and now I'm in the process of figuring out all the hybrids that come with that. And of course, because it's me, all the gunslinger and hybrids that I can come up with and everything. And once upon a time, I used to be that guy that just like wanted to get all the new tricks and didn't particularly care if they look good. But now I'm that person who's like, I don't want to move on from this until I can make this look really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think gunslingers are hard because, well, honestly, it's very clear that Jonathan Alvarez is sort of the well of initial gunslinger. Pretty much, I mean, there's some stringers too, not gonna lie, but I mean that he's pretty much opened that field up, not just with his videos, but also with his sheer abilities with gunslingers, who are just horrifying. I mean, it's horrifying to watch that guy spin and to be a new spinner. Like, it's just messed up. I mean, I've been spinning for like 12 years, and he's the guy I'm talking about. He's the best poi spinner that's ever lived, in my opinion. He's just very man, his performance, his skills, his creativity is just off the freaking charts. It's sad that he's no longer here to participate in this because I'm sure he would love. I mean, he's around, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about it because he might have some cool ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I've seen him do some really beautiful stuff. And he like one of the things that he was amazing at was figuring out what's unique to gunslingers. What is something that you can do with gunslingers that you cannot do with any other branch of Poi? Um, and I think that he did an amazing job exploring that. But we kind of like ran straight past that part where we're like, what traditional Poi stuff can we make work in the gunslinger realm? And I think there's still a lot to kind of uncover there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and it's cool that you continue to find new. And I said this in your video when you interviewed me, but I think it's challenging over the years to kind of find new things to sort of reinvent yourself. And I think this is also I interviewed Chad as the last podcast, but like, how do you continually reinvent yourself over the years to continually stay motivated in this thing, right? This is not one. Luckily, flow art is not just juggling, right? You know, like I mean, juggling is lots of things too, right? Like boxes and whatever else, and clubs and rings and whatever. But I mean, it's really challenging. Like for me right now, I'm stoked on the triple staff thing, but that's a new thing for me to continually stay invested in this, as at least in terms of my personal practice. And I think that's a question I have for you is how do you balance out your work with Drex Factor and like your personal practice? I mean, are they pretty much coalesced? So you're working on gunslingers, you post videos on gunslingers, or is it like you're over here, your Drex Factor thing is down here, or how do you balance that?
No, so I mean, like very very early on in my Poi spinning, and I'm really glad this happened. I remember reading this book called Mastery by a guy named George Leonard that like had a huge influence on how I practice. One of the big things he talks about in it being that you kind of learn to love the plateau. And this is one of those things that is incredibly hard for people when they're just getting into a given skill. Is as soon as they stop learning new stuff, their interest almost always wanes, and they kind of when this used to happen to me when I was younger, the thought that always happened in the back of my head was, well, so I stopped getting better. That must mean that it'll never get better, right? That must mean that I was never meant to do this thing. And one of the key insights from reading that book was, no, it just means that this stuff comes in cycles, and that you're going to wind up spending most of your time learning a skill on a plateau. So learn to love it and use that time to really, number one, polish the things that you learned in your last burst. And this is something that I think a lot of tech Poi kids could really, really, really benefit from this attitude, because you go in Poi chat and half of the content people post that's new stuff is this is mostly slop, but you'll get the idea and everything. It's just like it's okay to stop and make it not sloppy. This is something that I love about the way that Russian Poi spinners approach it. Is like they do not put it out there unless it is as clean as they can possibly make it.
Yep.
And kind of hitting that mentality has been a big help for me in terms of recognizing those places where my motivation might be flagging and be like, oh, back to the plateau, cool, no problem. But a big part of it is also recognizing the need for deliberate practice, and not just deliberate practice in Poi spinning, but deliberate practice in editing a video, in YouTube SEO, in marketing a product, in getting new people on my Patreon, and so on and so forth. All of these skills are things that need to be practiced and exercised and everything. And I'm ashamed to admit that I think that I'm really good at this point about making sure that I practice these skills, but I'm not always that good at practicing all of them. And all of them are important. And sadly, Poi is occasionally one of those things that I forget about, and I'll kind of have to remind myself. It's like, dude, you've spent 20 hours in the last 2 days working on this video that I know that you're really proud of, and I know you think is going to be awesome, but you know what? The whole point of this was supposed to be spinning. So take a $5, go put on some metal music, go spin out in your living room. This is going to make you happier overall. And I think every once in a while I kind of have to check myself and make that happen. I wish that I was better about the rituals. I wish I was better about, okay, it's 3 o'clock today, and you're now going to spend the next 40 minutes working on this trick. But unfortunately, I'm really, really bad at scheduling my time that way, and I just kind of have to come around to having moments where I'm like, dude, how long has it been since you last practiced? Make it happen, you know?
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking about the plateau thing a little bit. I think when you're a hoist spinner, I think in the beginning it's sort of like slow increase and then this drastic. There's a lot of like really large, for example, when you're flowers, you're anti-spin flowers, or just anti-spin flowers, stalls get clean. There's like this giant up, and there's like different sort of massive level jumps that basically that graph is like tricks versus time or something like that,
Right.
where you learn a lot of tricks. So, for example, you get stalls, your trick library expands drastically, and then you're like, okay, I got that. And then you start working on contact or something, and then that's like a slower increase. And then once you kind of get it, it's like boom. When
Yeah.
I think, and I think that's why people share a lot too. It's because the majority of their time is spent in this like trick learning absorption mode.
Yeah.
When if you're a juggler, it's basically like a very slow line with like little bumps every now and then, right? Like if you're a juggler, you spend all this time learning this thing and you get this little increase and then you kind of go feel like you're going down and you get so it's like a lot more defeating in that way, and I think that's also why jugglers share less sometimes.
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
because they have to spend more time practicing. Just to be honest, to learn a simple like a stall in juggling would be, I don't know, something
Sure.
really hard. And I think that's a challenge of the poi spinner. That's why I've also kind of left poi a little bit, is because I personally like the plateau, because that's when I have to be intrinsically motivated, right?
Right.
Like when I'm learning lots of stuff like the 30-day challenge, like I can, do each side of a trick after like freaking 5 minutes, that's like motivating to see people like that and stuff like that. But like when I'm at a place where I'm flatlining, like not learning a lot of things, but just kind of working on the things I've already shared on the internet. I'm basically in this place where like I need to find why I'm motivated. Like I need to find the discipline for myself to continue on those parts. So I think most poi spinners, you're right, probably need to hear that message where it's when you need to find the intrinsic motivation why you do this. When a lot of it is only external, it's really challenging to stay I don't know what the word would be, not just motivated, but engaged, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think literally the word engagement, when other people are engaging in what you do these days on the internet, you find more reasons to be engaged. I think threads on the internet can easily show that, right? Like when other people are engaged in a conversation, you get engaged or into that. But I think there's a lot of things missing on like why we stay engaged, not you and I, but the average person. Why do they stay engaged? And I think the internet can be motivating, but also be really defeating to your intrinsic motivation too,
Yes.
right? And that's part of that poi contest thing we were talking, the top 10 poi spinners. When it's like when you're on that plateau and you just learn some stuff and you see everybody else spiking in this direction, and you're just sort of chilling at your level, it's really hard to stay. And I think you might be right. Sometimes I've recently, I don't watch a ton of staff videos, like triple staff videos. I only watch ones that I know are going to give me information that I know I can learn. Because I watch too many of them, I'm going to get pretty demotivated. If I watch me triple staff video, it's going to hurt. Like not my ego, but my intrinsic motivation. I'm going to be like, oh my God, I have so far to go. I'm never going to get there. What the heck am I watching? While
Right.
some people find inspiration, right? I am inspired by the guy, but I can't keep digging that well for myself and like feeling bad about it. So I do think that there is something interesting about that plateau that poi spinners experience a lot differently than say a contact staffer or a
No, totally. And there's one thread that I want to actually grab onto in there where you were talking about the different learning curves between jugglers and poi spinners, where absolutely the learning curve is easier for poi when we first start out, and I think that's part of why people do it. It's something that feels just challenging enough that it's not too easy, but it's easy enough that they can see a lot of progress relatively quickly. And I think that that's one of the things that makes the art really good. The problem winds up being in the long term that at some point you do have to prepare yourself for when you hit that plateau and the action slows down. And especially curating the top 10 list, we've seen so many examples, even over the course of the past 6 years, and I know long before that too, of kids that'll come in and be like superstar hotshots for a couple years and then reach that plateau. And when they're not getting that immediate kind of dopamine fix of getting the new tricks or getting the attention for it and everything, then they move on to something else.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. I think that's very. I mean, I move on to something else. I spin poi. I hate to say it, for money most of the time. But yeah, no. So as we wrap this up, I'm just curious. Two questions left. Like, where do you see Drex Factor going in the future? Well, first off, let me answer this three questions. Where did Drex Factor come from? Let's go there.
Answer me these questions three. Now, so are you talking?
Just the name.
Oh, I mean, so my nickname has been Drex since college, and I went to Burning Man for the first time with my friends from college, so everybody there knew me as Drex, and thus all the fire people knew me as Drex. My full name is Ben Drexler. I just knew a lot of Bens in college. And no, Drex Factor comes from the fact that I'm a comic book nerd. It comes from X Factor, the comic book. Yeah. Yeah, no, I got super deep into comics as a teenager and everything, and this was after X Factor was supposed to be the reunion of the original 5 X-Men and everything. It was in the era of, Havoc and Multiple Men and all that, and it was never my favorite comic, but it was a really easy name comparison to make. So yeah, it's just because I'm a comic book nerd.
So wait, are you excited by the potential of the new Deadpool movie to bring together X Factor?
X-Force. There is a difference.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. Man, I messed that one up. Dang, I guess I didn't read enough comics. Only reason I know X-Force is because I like Rob Liefeld when I was a kid, so I had, collected the Executioner song X-Force beginnings. And,
totally.
Okay, so question number 2. Let's leave this comic. We could go for a while on that one, I think. Question number 2 would be, where do you see Drex Factor going in, 2020? When we hit Deltron 2020, what are we going to do? Like, where do you go next? Because I mean, it's clear, we just kind of discussed that you're an inspiration to many. I mean, do you plan on ending Drex Factor, or do you think eventually it's handed off to young Drex Factorites, or what happens with this?
Well, so there's the question of what I think is going to happen, and then the question of what I hope is going to happen.
Okay.
And if you need a short answer on this, let me know, because clearly okay. I've got a bad tendency to give very long-winded answers on most things. No, so interestingly enough, this past winter I almost quit. I came this close because I reached a point, and I know you're thinking about there was some personal drama in my life and everything, and that's not actually the reason why. The beginning of this actually started before that. No, I had a moment last September when I was so uninspired by the stuff that I was creating that I kind of got to a point where I'm like, I don't think I should put anything out there to the world. If I'm not happy with it, then why am I doing this kind of thing? And I had to marinate on that for a few months, and at the point where I was searching other full-time jobs and everything. And as I kind of thought on it for a good long time, I also reached a point where I realized how important this actually is to me in my life. I feel like this is the thing that I've done in my world that has had the biggest positive footprint to it, and that it's most easy to see the positive footprint that it leaves. I worked in the nonprofit world for years, but one of the problems that I had working there was there were a lot of things that we did that I didn't actually think made the situations we were working in better, number one. And number two, that, the outcomes for the things that we were trying to do were either so difficult to find, physical ways that they were actually working, or that you just kind of had to take it on faith that, we made a difference here and everything. And putting poi out there to the world, helping people find this thing that they can enjoy, is so much more direct in terms of seeing the positive byproducts of it, that that is one of those things that's keeping me coming back to it and everything, and one of those reasons that I didn't quit. So the mission for this year is to double down on that. It is to help people. It's to help bring this thing into people's lives, which I think is going to improve their lives, to help them find joy, to give them something that they can do outside of their work that is going to make them feel that feeling of accomplishment that they get when they learn those new tricks, that's going to give them the tools to express themselves, that is going to connect them with their bodies in a way that they don't otherwise get to. They get to turn their bodies into a work of art, which I think is very special, and it's very cathartic and helpful. So the immediate future of Drex Factor is to work on efforts to make that happen, to find more ways of making it more interactive, to make people feel, to give people the resources necessary to do this, and to make them feel like they're part of a larger community. I hope it'll be around in 2020. My ideal world of worlds, I would like to see this blow up more. I would like to see the resources that I give people become lucrative enough that I can hire help, that I can do things like taking the editing off of my plate and take some of the marketing promotion off of my plate and everything, and allow me to focus more on the kind of vision and creation parts of it. In the long term, I would love to create an end-to-end process for people to be able to get into this world, to be able to connect with other people in it, and to be able to have a track that they can go through, both creatively and professionally if they want to be able to embrace this world.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah. Ambitious, I know.
No, I mean, it all starts today, right? 10 years from now, 11 years from now, you never know, right? That's kind of what I've been thinking, and I think a lot of projects start like that. I would never have thought when I started the fire safety project how much impact it would have made, right? Like I never would have considered. Same with Vulcan Tech Gospel. I mean, that thing is like a staple now. It's just a part of the nomenclature of flow arts, which is kind of funny. Like literally people don't even know I'm basically involved with that, which is cool. Like I'm down to be secrets in that way, and yeah, I think that's a noble goal that you have. And the last thing I have before we go is, at this point in time, if you had a message for a new spinner of some sort, what would you say? What would you tell them? Like somebody that's just getting started, like, hey, I just found this thing at a party, or what would you say to them? What kind of motivating hype would you give them?
So I'm actually going to reference the video that's going live on my channel tomorrow.
Nice.
This. No, because of course in the process of deciding that I wasn't going to quit, that I was going to keep on doing this, one of those things that I went through was kind of cataloging for myself the positive things that have happened in my life as a result of poi spinning and the flow arts. And turns out it's a really awesome list. Some of my favorite things that have happened in my life in the past 10 years have been a result of this. Whether it's connecting with an incredible community, gaining the confidence to be able to go out there as a performer, or, I've always had the confidence to go on stage. This is now my third creative career, but the thing that it gave me confidence in that really has changed a lot of things in my life, you're going to laugh at this, is the confidence to be a mathematician. I thought for most of my life that I was bad at math, and working through the kind of trig equations and everything that model poi, I wound up writing an 80-page math paper and teaching math classes at flow festivals and everything. This is from a person that failed algebra 3 times. That's such a huge transformation in my life. Number 3, the connection with my body, the ability to dance and be creative and create art with my body. I'm somebody who's been awkward for almost all of my life, and that has been such an exceptional gift. Number 4, the discipline that came with it, the kind of gateway drug into motivation and figuring out how to turn deliberate practice into real things. And that's percolated through to my approach to making videos and my approach to creating a business and everything. These 4 things are really, really huge. Learning how to spin changed my life. And to a new spinner, what I would say is it's got the potential to change yours too. So dive in, drink deep, and enjoy the ride.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I feel like, Drex, first off, I think we should end there. But I want to say that I just thank you for your candidness and just being willing to chat with me, because this was a really amazing chat and, being vulnerable. So thank you again for your time. And this is the Sticks Out podcast number 11. And once you get to 12, just for anyone listening now, we are going to release them as I gain next season. Or maybe it'll be whatever, just 12 a year. And with that, Drex, stay online. Thank you, Drex. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. Yeah, no problem. And, I'm going to cancel this thing. Hold on. Anyway, bye. Here I go. Ugh.